Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back. In this lesson, we will be discussing how to actually animate and move the text layer around so that at the beginning it starts here and at the end it's there. So in order for us to do that, we need to set certain points and tell After Effects that we want it to start here and end here, and over time animate over to here. So let's get started. Let's put our cursor right at the beginning by clicking and dragging, putting it all the way to the beginning, or we can press home on the keyboard. Same thing works with end to go all the way to this end. So home. Okay, let's go to our text layer, click on the two little arrows. We're inside the transform properties now. We'll go into position and we will click on the stopwatch. Now what that did is it created a keyframe at the very beginning of our composition. This keyframe is specific to where our text layer exists in the composition. Okay, so now let's press end on our keyboard, which brought us to the end of our composition, and we can click on our text layer, making sure it's selected, and drag it to where we want it to end. Now it could be up here, it could be here, or it could be wherever you want. So we're going to set it up to right here. Okay, so now let's go to the start of our composition by pressing home on our keyboard. You'll notice that the text layer is now back at the beginning. So if we were to click and drag, you'll see that it slowly starts animating between the two until it gets all the way to the end. So that is the very basics of keyframe animation inside After Effects. Hey guys, and welcome back to this After Effects training course. In the last lesson we discussed animating a text layer from the top right to the bottom left using two keyframes. In this lesson we will be digging a little deeper into keyframe animation. Okay, we can see that we have a keyframe at the beginning and a keyframe at the end. We can scrub through this roughly in the middle, and the text is in the middle roughly, but there is no keyframe there because it's just animating between the two. If we wanted this to, for example, start at the top right and do more of a curve to get to the bottom, the way we do that is by clicking the text and then bringing it up like that. And you can see just by creating 3 keyframes we can create a much more interesting curvy flow. So let's see what that does. So let's do that. It goes up and then it heads back down. Okay, so we can click on this one or we can click on this one and it'll change which keyframe we are working on. So for now we will click on this one, and you can see that we can actually click on this long line here, which will change the curvature of the animation on the one side, and we can do the same thing on the other side. And we can kind of fine tune how we want to animate this. I'm going to undo that to keep it how it was. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add some rotation to this. So let's bring our timeline cursor to the beginning again, to the start of our composition. We will click on rotation, we will add a keyframe. It hasn't done anything yet because our rotation is still set to 0. We've just created a keyframe at 0 rotation. Okay, so let's go to our center here, and a good way to know that you're on this keyframe is by looking over here. It'll be blue. When you're off of it, it doesn't light up. When you go over it, it does light up. Okay, so we click on the bottom layer here. Okay, so now we will go to rotation while it's selected and click and drag and turn it upside down to 180 degrees. Then at the very end, by pressing end on your keyboard, we will continue rotating until we hit 360 degrees, which means we've completed a full circle. So if we go back to home and scrub through it, you'll notice that it'll do one entire full rotation along our animation keyframe points. Now this can be done to pretty much everything in After Effects. Almost everything has the ability to add keyframes to it. So for example, scale, we can turn the scale on. We can set it to 125. We can go to the beginning, place it back to 100. We can go to our end by pressing end on the keyboard, setting it back to 100, pressing enter. And then if we go through it now, it scales a little bit and then goes back down. So to exaggerate that, we'll go here. We'll make sure we're on the keyframe. If we're here and we do it, it'll create a second keyframe, which we do not want because that will create bad animation. It could be choppy or it just won't look good. So what we can do is we can click on the keyframe and click delete on our keyboard, or we can just simply Command Z to undo. Let's put our cursor on top of the keyframes we have in the center, make sure they're lit up. That means we are above them. And to exaggerate it, we'll click and drag and make it pretty big. We'll go home on the keyboard and then we'll click and drag, and you can see it gets much larger and then it goes smaller again. So very smooth animation all the way from the beginning to the end. The next thing is playing back. After Effects requires a lot of processing power to play back animation inside After Effects. So typically you'd have to render the After Effects project in order for it to play back smoothly. We can see underneath here that while we were scrubbing, it was rendering certain frames, but it didn't get all of them. This is how I like to set it up. If you're in an older version of After Effects, you won't need to change this because the default is number pad 0. The only thing you'll need to change is current time if you'd like to set it up how I do. Okay, so let's press home. We'll go back to the beginning. We'll press number pad 0, and it'll slowly render as we see the green bar going across. When it gets to the end, it'll start over again, and this is playing it now in real time because it's fully rendered. There is the animation, almost like a screensaver, showing our text layer animate, grow, rotate across the screen and end up in a different position. Hey guys, welcome to the next lesson. Let's get right to it. Let's go to Layer, New, Solid. We will create a red solid layer. We will name it red square. It will be the same size as the composition. To verify that, again, we can click on Make Comp Size. We want square pixels and units as pixels. That's all fine. We'll click on OK. Now, because this layer is at the very top, that's all we see. So what we can do is we can move it to the middle if we want our text layer to show up above. Okay, so we have this created and it fills the screen. Now, let's say we wanted to create just a little box or a line, for example, that sits underneath. Well, that's easy to do. What we can do is we can actually go back into the layer solid settings, and we can actually change the height to 200 pixels and the width to, let's say, 400. That's what it'll look like. Okay, so, or we could do width 800 and height 50. Or we could do height 10 to make a thin line. So let's go with that. With it selected, we can go here, click on it, and drag it to where we want it. So now it's sitting underneath. And we have just created a separate layer from our text layer and a separate layer from our background white layer that can be animated individually. Now it'll have the same properties as our text layer. Go to transform, we can create a keyframe, go to here, and we can pull it all the way to there, and we can hit a rotate and rotate it by that, then go back to the beginning and reset the first keyframe to 0, and then without selecting the layer, you won't see the animation path, so you can follow it a lot better. It's far from professional, but it's interesting nonetheless. To create shape layers inside Adobe After Effects, we first need to have a composition open. So let's create a 1080p composition based off a preset we made in an earlier tutorial. Let's go to OK. Now that we've created our composition, if we go up to the Tools panel at the top, we have a few different options. The square right here, if you click and hold, will give you a few different presets of shapes. So for this one, we can go to the rectangle tool. Now inside our composition panel, we can click and hold and draw whatever size of a shape we'd like using the rectangle preset. So that is created. You'll notice down here that it's called Shape Layer 1 and it fills the entire composition. Now we can go back to our regular selection tool. We can go down into our shape layer. We can open it up and you'll see there are a whole bunch of different options. So typically the easiest way to start working with these and understand them is by clicking on Add and choosing a different option down here. For example, we can twist and you'll see what it does just by default. We can open up the window down here and increase how much it twists by, as well as where it twists. And we can get some really cool results very fast just by changing a few properties. Okay, let's Command Z and undo those. Another option is, for example, pucker and bloat. So if we go into here, we can actually set it to a whole bunch of different numbers here and get as well some really cool results. So just like most things in After Effects, you can animate these as well. So let's go to Command Z, undo that. At the start of our composition here, we will click on the stopwatch to create a keyframe, and then we will bring our timeline cursor to the very end, and we will click and drag on the 10 parameter and turn it into that shape. So over time, as we scroll back to the start of our composition, you can see that it starts out with a rounded rectangle and turns into this cool shape. Welcome back to our After Effects training course. By the end of this course, you'll understand the basics of After Effects. You'll be able to start from scratch, create something, animate it, and export it. Okay, in this one we will be working with masks. So what we'll do is we'll click on our red square, we'll go into Layer, Solid Settings, we will make it the comp size, we will go to OK, and the reason we are not seeing it is because we have the position set to a far area. So what we can do is turn off the keyframes, we can click Reset, and then now it's back to its original position without any keyframes. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is, with our red square layer selected, we will go up to our pen tool and we will click until we've almost completed it, and then by clicking on the very first one we made, we will complete our shape or our mask layer. We can go now back to our original selection tool, and by clicking on any one of these little squares here, we can change the shape of it easily. Okay, so for now we can just make a rough shape here. Okay, so let's go red square, we'll open it up, we'll go into our masks now, because we now have a mask that is only showing this much of our entire red layer that we created. So inside the mask 1, these are our mask properties. So we can feather the edge, which means if we click and drag here, you can see we can get some pretty cool shapes like that feather out into the white. For now we'll keep it to 0. We can change the mask opacity from 100, just like our layer, down to 0, just like our mask layer. Or we can change the actual size of it by going into our mask expansion and reducing it or making it larger. The problem though is when we make it larger, it increases or scales the size of each corner, and that's why they are beginning to be round the larger you go. So if we did want to scale the entire mask itself without having the rounded edges, there is a way to do that. You click on mask 1 and then you press Command T. So what you can do is click on the edge here, hold Shift, and then you can actually scale it, and it'll be even as you scale. If you don't hold Shift, it'll follow the mouse. So let's hold Shift and let's make it a little larger. Okay, so that's done. We'll unselect everything by going down here and then go back into our mask, and now we're back to where we started, only the shape's a little larger. Alright, welcome back to this After Effects training course, and in this lesson we will be discussing animating masks. Okay, so inside our red square here we have a mask created with several different points. We will create a keyframe by clicking the stopwatch. You can verify that by seeing the little blue diamond here. If we go all the way to, let's say, 6 seconds and 3 frames, we can click over here and create a keyframe at exactly the same shape as this keyframe. Even though there are 2 keyframes, nothing happens because this keyframe has the exact same properties as this keyframe. So let's put our timeline cursor on that keyframe. We can see this by here. And what we'll do is we will click away, then click one of the spots and drag it. So now what happens is over time that one spot grows to over here. If we wanted a second one, we put the timeline cursor over that keyframe, make sure, then we drag that over there. So now over time both those grow. The next thing we're going to do is set our timeline cursor to the very beginning, and we can click and drag this one closer. So we can see that the animation happens much faster now because it's happening over only 1 second and 4 frames compared to several seconds. So now let's go to 2 seconds, and we will now take this point, move it there. We will take this point, place it roughly back where it was. We'll take this point, roughly where it was, and we'll take that point and put it there. So now between those frames, it grows and then does that. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is click on the mask and press delete. So we're back to where we originally started with just our red square layer. Okay, let's select our pen tool, and this time instead of clicking, we will click and drag for each single point. We will end our mask by clicking here, and you'll notice that this time there are round edges instead of points. This is because we clicked and dragged and created these Bezier points. Welcome back, guys. Okay, in this lesson we will discuss how to parent one layer to another. What that means is one layer will control another. Okay, let's get started. So down here in the composition window, we can see we are working inside it now because it is highlighted in blue. If we click on the red square, we can see that we are working with this layer. We can go down to the transform layers, and we can see all the properties here. Over here we have a section called parent. If we click on the pick whip of the top layer, which is the text layer, and parent it to our red square layer, what that means is the text layer will follow the red square layer. For example, if we click on position here and click and drag left to right, do you see how the text layer is following the other layer? or if we rotate, the text layer is following just, or if we click on the rotation, it rotates together. That is because this layer is linked to the red square layer. This can be a very powerful feature because when you're working with several different layers, you could link them all up together to one main layer and have that as the controlling layer that affects all of them. In other words, you won't have to go through the dozen other layers and switch all the properties inside those layers to get it to animate how you'd like it to be.